So I wanted to talk about an important topic today, and that's dealing with these legislative findings that are contained in bills that amend an initiative statute, i.e., a law that was placed into statute, into our codes by the people through a voter-approved initiative. So, for example, most recently in reviewing some of the 2023 session bills, I have come across some proposing to amend California's Safe Drinking Water and Toxic Enforcement Act of 1986. This is better known as Prop 65 and the warnings that go along because of that. And it was enacted by the voters. And in bills that amend or propose to amend Prop 65, they include basically the same legislative finding and declaration in all of the bills. And frankly, I think it's too simplistic a statement. In my mind, it raises the question whether this kind of language actually meets the requirement of Prop 65. So in Prop 65, in Section 1 of the ballot measure, it provided some purpose language, and it said that the people of California find that hazardous chemicals pose a serious potential threat to their health and well-being, and that state government agencies have failed to provide them with adequate protection, and that these failures have been serious enough to lead investigations by federal agencies of the administration of California's toxic protection programs, and goes on to specify other purposes. Now, later on in Prop 65, actually in Section 7, it states, to further its purposes, important phrase, this initiative may be amended by statute passed in each house by a 2/3 vote. So again, Prop 65 was a statutory initiative rather than a constitutional initiative where they were amending or adding something to our state constitution. It, of course, was enacted by the people, and it does allow Prop 65, again, formerly called the Safe Drinking Water and Toxic Enforcement Act, to actually be amended by the legislature, meaning it doesn't have to go back to the people. So it says, as I read, that it requires a 2/3 vote of both houses of the legislature, but the amendment has to further the purposes of Prop 65. Now, you may recall that in Article 2, Section 10 of our state constitution, subdivision C of Section 10, it says that the legislature may amend or repeal a referendum statute. And then it says, the legislature may amend or repeal an initiative statute by another statute that becomes effective only when approved by the electors. Here's the catch. Unless the initiative statute permits amendment or repeal without the electors' approval. So this provision allows an initiative that was adopted by the state's voters to be amended by the legislature, such as Prop 65, in only one instance, if the initiative permits amendment without the electorate's approval. And of course, in Section 7, Prop 65 does allow amendment by the legislature. So in proposing an amendment to Prop 65, when they desire to amend it, they include at the end what the Legislative Counsel Office calls a plus section. It can be viewed at the very end of the bill. And it contains a short legislative finding and declaration. And so what you see in these types of Prop 65 amendment bills is a simple statement. The legislature finds and declares that this act furthers the purposes of the Safe Drinking Water and Toxic Enforcement Act of 1986, and then sets forth the statutory provisions of Division 20 of the Health and Safety Code. So the question that's raised in my mind by that simple statement at the end of the bill proposing an amendment to Prop 65 is whether the language in that standardized language is actually sufficient under the Constitution, Article 2, Section 10C. I think there ought to be some additional explanation why the legislature believes that Prop 65 stated purposes are being furthered by their proposed amendment. But unfortunately, like many other bills amending initiatives that were adopted by the people, statutory initiatives, of course, They all contain this very simple statement, and they don't in any way explain why the legislature believes that the proposed amendment either, furthers the purposes of the act or in some way goes along with it. And so it just merely states this simple legislative finding and declaration without any further justification or explanation. So I think bills amending Prop 65 and others of them ought to have some details or explanation why the legislature makes that finding and declaration. Prop 65, for example, has 4 different specified purposes that are in Section 1 of the Act. So a legislative amendment bill could easily, in that plus section, reference one or all 4 of those specified purposes, again, for a Prop 65 Act. So I think this approach of providing a short explanation is what should be taken throughout. Right now, we do it with urgency clauses and special statutes. So the idea here, in my mind, is that if courts examine an urgency clause or a special statute finding, there's actually at least a sentence or two and maybe a full paragraph that explains why the legislature has determined this particular bill needs an urgency clause or why it qualifies as a special statute. Now, to be fair, the Constitution in Article 4 that defines an urgency clause does require a statement. It doesn't for a special statute, but we nonetheless use those. And I think we ought to use them here when we are, again, amending voter approved measures.